Hello, I'm Dilek Tuna. Welcome to another episode of Context. Former US President Donald Trump says he's had a very good phone call with Chinese President Xi Jinping. A lengthy 90-minute conversation centred on trade, rare earths and the complexities of US-China competition. While Trump has often been critical of Beijing, this renewed contact suggests that old dynamics between the world's two largest economies may be shifting once again. Trump says the deal is back on track. But what does this really mean in a world increasingly defined by economic warfare, supply chain shocks and strategic minerals? Today on Context, we ask, is the US-China rivalry thawing or just recalibrating? And what does Trump's return to the international stage mean for global trade, rare earths and future diplomacy? Joining us from Portugal, we have political analyst with sharp insight into the strategic stakes between Washington and Beijing. Francisco Roche Gonçalves joins us now. Welcome to the program, Francisco.
Thank you so much for having me. Hello.
Hello. Sorry about the pronunciation of your name there. It was a bit tricky for me.
It was beautiful.
Thank you. Now, is this phone call symbolic or could it mark the beginning of a more stable era in the rare earth supply chain?
Well, to start this conversation, we should say that this new way of approaching international relations based on personal relations between leaders is somehow childish. Both the US and China have their own national interest, and no one can think that a sharp leader as Xi, after a phone call, can determine the Chinese national interest or the Chinese foreign policy just based on that phone call. China has their own agenda, they have their own national interest, they have their own strategic perspective of the world and their goals for the 21st century. So this can mean that they can start to talk. But they have very different approaches, and they have very different interests that are colliding. We are witnessing a change in the international system that will be very severe for the 21st century, and we must get used to that. And we all must adapt to the new situation of the world in which international relations are changing and the power balancing is changing worldwide.
Okay. Yeah, you're absolutely right there. I think we're all becoming more and more accustomed to Trump's theatrics. But he called the conversation with Xi very positive. Do you think this marks any real shift in Beijing's strategic posture toward Washington?
I believe that the Chinese are very institutional in their relations. Of course, President Xi, like President Trump, when speaking to each other, unless they're not urban or they're not speak with another person, they can be very kind and peaceful. But after that conversation, reality checks come. And then both countries want to impose or want to implement their strategies. What Xi Jinping wants sometimes collide with what Donald Trump wants. And when I say of Xi or Trump, I'm saying China and the United States. So the United States want to control part of the supply chains for rare earths. China has been controlling the rare earths market in the world, not only the market, but also the technology. Can someone really think that they want to lose that control and want to lose that perspective of the world? They are controlling the supply chain, they are controlling the technology. They do not want to lose it. In the last year, in December last year, China approved a directive that forbidden the export of the technology to process rare earths. This can give you an idea of the kind of strategy that they have for the rare earth markets. They do not want to lose the control that gives them an advantage over everyone else. So we can start to calibrate the relations. We can start to balance power in that market, but it can take some time, and it will surely take more than one conversation on the phone call.
Okay, and Trump did make a bit of an emphasis on the rare earths minerals when he announced this phone call. Given China's near monopoly on rare earths, does this call signal a US strategy shift perhaps towards cooperation or dependence?
Of course, the United States have a problem accessing markets because since the end of the Cold War, the Western powers, particularly the United States, have looked at China and Asia as the factory of the world. So until some time ago, the Western countries didn't really care if they controlled that kind of market, as long as Western companies could control part of the final products and part of other markets. But what happened is that China and other Asian powers, in a speed that never before in history has been seen, transformed what was their export products to somehow some industrial non-complex products to having much more complex products in the first period, and then starting to have their own brands. 20 years ago, there was no BYD. 20 years ago, there were no iSense. 20 years ago, there was no Xiaomi or no Huawei, or no other company as we see them today. You know, if someone told us 20 years ago that 2 decades after that date, China would have a 10-cent agglomerate, a company that is really sharp and really professional in introducing innovation in the market, no one would believe. When China entered World Trade Organization in 2001, Western powers were all worried of what happened in 9/11 in New York. While Western powers were sleeping, China and some other Asian countries, like Vietnam, for instance, has transformed the world economy. So what now we are seeing is that economic power is changing to, or is transforming in political power, which will be transformed in military power. They're all connected, and China wants to have their seat on the table. They're leading the world in innovation. They want to be recognized for it, and they're not going to give away the power that they gain with a lot of hard work. So this will not be easy times for Western countries or for the United States.
Okay, so you've partly answered this question, but perhaps a little more analysis here. Is this just about minerals, or does this point to a deeper tech Cold War, especially with AI, EVs, and military hardware in mind?
Well, let me tell you a story. 1.5 years ago, I went to Beijing, and I visited the headquarters of Chinese brand of cars, and I've seen their SUV top model, the same as a Mercedes EQS, this SUV. And then I asked for the price, and they were producing it, they're selling it in China for 70,000 euros. The Mercedes car, to compete with that one, costs for about 140,000 euros, so double the price. This is how far the tech war went between China and Western countries. And this is how far China is ahead, as I was saying, not only in technology, but also in the control they have of the supply chain. Of course, this will deepen the war. And of course, that no one wants to lose control of the innovation. And Donald Trump, in my opinion, and that is a reason why Elon Musk went away from him in the last few weeks. When Donald Trump alienates his allies, like European countries, when he's saying that he's going to annex Greenland, for instance, he's putting his allies away from him. And the network of alliances that the United States had during the Cold War, and I'm comparing both periods, in order to win the Cold War, the United States have established a network of alliances that gave them leverage over Soviet Union. In what concerns the relationship with China, you have two opportunities or two strategies. Either you face it alone, or you establish a network of alliances that gives you the leverage to level the game. Because China right now is so far ahead in time that if the United States try to go it alone with them, they have much more investment in brain power nowadays. They are open to technology, and they're really, really fast in implementing innovation in products. That's very important in the new technology market. You can, of course, develop a technology, but if you are not able to transform that technology into a product and into a product that the market wants, you will only have an innovation. What you have to do is to implement it and transforming in reality in the market. And the Chinese are really good at that, and that gives them a lot of leverage in competition with other countries.
Okay. So having said that, Trump emphasized a positive conclusion on rare earth complexity, but what might that mean in practical terms for American manufacturers or defense industries?
Well, the thing is that the United States needs both the minerals, and they need to become better in the technology to process those minerals. Of course, they can hire the brain power to do so. But how can you hire the brain power to do so when you are expelling foreign students and you are expelling immigrants from your countries? You know, Donald Trump is somehow making everything, pardon me, I'm not American, but just as an analyst, is doing most of it in the wrong way, because he's changing what it used to be. One of the great weapons of the American diplomacy, it was the American soft power, the ability for the United States to attract the best and the most bright and the most innovative one. Because if you wanted to be sharp and if you want to be ahead, you would go to the United States, because you would feel free enough to do so, to experiment, to introduce developments. But if you're a foreigner right now and you look at the United States, is that the country where you want to be a student, where you want to be a researcher? And all of this is breaking, in the long term, the power of the United States, because it's breaking their soft power worldwide. Before Donald Trump, in European Union, if you spoke with the people, most of the people would somehow be resistant to a closer relationship to China. When Mr. Trump came to power this second time and started to alienating his allies, saying that he wants to annex Canada or Greenland, and if you doesn't invest as much as I want you to invest in defense, I probably will not defend you if there's a war. This ruins the trust between allies. And the help they could get for this 21st century strategic battle, they are alienating it. So in the long term, somehow Donald Trump is giving a lot of goodies to see.
Okay, Francisco, one last question. How would Europe likely respond to any softening of US-China trade tensions, particularly given EU efforts to diversify critical mineral supply?
Well, most of the European leaders and decision makers, they're thinking that the United States are returning to what can be considered as a sphere of influence world, where the United States have their sphere of influence, Russia will have their sphere of influence, China will have their sphere of influence. So in any approach between the United States and Russia or the United States and China has to be seen in Europe as reinforcement of that policy. And that once again will get European Union countries farther away from the United States, because there is no strategy for cooperation with the European Union. Pardon me. Donald Trump, for instance, doesn't recognize or doesn't speak with the President of the Council of the European Union, the President of the European Commission. They always want to do a bilateral negotiation with countries. Normal, no? The country, because he sees the country as a smaller entity. When the President of the United States negotiates with the President of France, he's negotiating with a much smaller country. But when he negotiates with the European Union, he's negotiating with an entity of 500 million people. It's completely different. So he doesn't want to negotiate with the European Union. So when he approaches China or when he approaches Russia, he's putting a lot of European politicians in tension, saying that he's getting farther and farther away from us.
Okay. Francisco, thank you so much for joining us. We appreciate your analysis and insight.
I was hoping I could be helpful.
Sorry, could you repeat that?
I was hoping I could be helpful. So.
Oh, very much so.
Thank you so much for the invitation.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
So
bye-bye.
Bye-bye, Francisco. So as the dust settles on another high-level phone call, we're left with more questions than answers. Can rare earth cooperation coexist with a broader strategic rivalry, or are these minerals simply the new front lines of global competition? From trade talks to tech supremacy, the power struggle continues. That's all from us today on Context. Thank you for watching.